Hi, Michael.
Hi.
This question is a bit long. I'm going to read it. The question is it possible that someone has been drawn to this path by the extraordinary promise of liberation and end for the suffering, believing that Atma-vichara will give them that liberation? And even though they feel some resonance with the teachings and have some capacity to put them into practice on a daily basis, ultimately, due to a childhood of great pain, abandonment, abuse, those conflicts end up prevailing in their minds, and even though to a little extent they get some minimal progress, what persists in the back of their minds is the feeling of not attaching a higher priority to purify the mind before being willing enough to effectively do Atma-vichara.
Right. That is, of all the means to purify the mind, Atma-vichara is by far and away the most efficacious. It is the Atma-vichara and self-surrender are the only means, the only direct means to purify the mind. The mind can be purified by other means. Bhagavan, for example, Bhagavan has explained in Upadeshundya, in verse 3 of Upadeshundya, he says that nishkarmiya karma, that's action not motivated by desire, nishkarmiya karma done for God, that implies for the love of God, will purify the mind and thereby show the way to liberation. What he means by show the way to liberation, when the mind is purified, it becomes clear. So only when the mind is being purified, at least to a certain extent, will it clearly recognize that the only means to liberation, ultimately the only direct means, is to turn our attention within, to know what we actually are. When the mind is very impure, it will not be attracted to this path of self-investigation, and it will look for other means for attaining liberation. Liberation means liberation from all the suffering that is inevitable so long as we rise as ego and thereby identify ourselves as a body. So liberation means the annihilation of ego, as Bhagavan says in the final verse of Uninterrupted. So what Bhagavan, as I say, in verse 3 of Upadeshundya, Bhagavan says that nishkarmiya karma, done for the love of God, will purify the mind. It's important to understand that what purifies the mind is not actually the actions that we do, because we can do the same actions. If we do them without love for God, that's not going to purify our mind. So it is the key to purifying the mind is the love for God. And the other side of love for God, if we genuinely have love for God, we will not have desire for other things. So long as we have desire for other things, our love for God is less than perfect. So nishkarmiya karma and true nishkarmiya karma and can be done only to the extent that we are willing to do actions just for the love of God and not for any expectation or not with any desire for any to gain any result from that action. So having said that in verse 3, he then goes on to explain in the subsequent verses what are the different types of action that we can do to purify the mind. There are three instruments of action: body, speech, and mind. So in verse, and actions done by body for the love of God are called puja or worship. Actions done by the speech for the love of God is japa or singing hymns. And action done by the mind for the love of God is meditation. So in the fourth verse, he says, Didamidu, this is certain. Puja, japa, and dhyana are respectively actions of body, speech, and mind. And in this order, each one is more efficacious than the previous one. That is, the least effective is puja. More effective means efficacious in purifying the mind. More efficacious than puja is japa. And more efficacious than japa is dhyana, meditation. That is because why this is the case? Because the mind is obviously a more subtle instrument than the speech, and the speech is relatively more subtle than the gross actions or other grosser actions of the body. So the subtler, the more subtle the level at which we are doing actions, the more that will purify the mind. For example, we can be doing puja, but our mind can be wandering and thinking of other things. And we don't, when we're doing puja, because our attention is on the is on this gross action of whatever worship we are doing, that can mean ritualistic worship or whatever type of worshipping God in any way, by body. We are less likely to notice when the mind is slipping away and thinking of other things. When we're doing japa, it's more easy to notice when the mind has slipped away. And when we're doing dhyana, it's very obvious. Either we're thinking of God or we're thinking of something else. So it's very obvious when our mind has slipped away. So in this order, each one is more purifying than the other. So that's what he says in the fourth verse. Then he goes through each of these in turn. In the fifth verse, he talks about what is worship, what is good worship of God, and he says. It's easy if I just get the verses up here. What he says is, there's a concept in Shaiva Siddhanta called Ashtamurti. That means 8 forms. God is considered as having 8 forms. What those 8 forms are can be interpreted in slightly different ways, but generally speaking, the 8 forms are the 5 elements, that's earth, water, fire, air, and space, sun, moon, and jivas. Jivas mean sentient beings. So these are all considered to be forms of God. So what Bhagavan says in this verse is, considering all the 8 forms to be forms of God, worshipping is good puja. That implies worshipping any of these 8 forms, considering them to be God, is good puja. The term he uses in Tamil, he doesn't use the Sanskrit term Ashtamurti, which means 8 forms. He uses a Tamil equivalent, which is Ennuru. Ennuru means 8 forms. But the word en can mean 8. It can also mean thought. So there's also an indication here that all these forms, that is the 5 elements, the sun, the moon, jiva, in other words, all phenomena, are actually nothing but thought forms. They're nothing but creations of our own mind. But if we consider these to be all forms, all phenomena, to be forms of God, if we worship them in whatever way, whether by ritualistic worship or in any other way, that is good puja of God. It's what Bhagavan says here. People often associate this verse with, because he mentions the 8 forms, and one of those 8 forms is jiva. People associate this with doing service to living beings. That can also be a worship of God, provided that we serve people or animals with the attitude that we are worshipping God in that form. So that's all he says in this verse, but he's just defining what he means by puja. When he referred to puja in the previous verse, this is what he means. But he said this is less efficacious than either japa or dhyana. So in the 6th verse, he goes on to describe japa, but he describes a little bit more than japa. He starts by saying, varatilil. That means them worshipping. Them praising. Praising here implies singing hymns of praise of God, singing songs in praise of God. So rather than just singing songs in praise of God, better than that is Uchavaku, doing japa in a loud voice. Better than doing japa in a loud voice is doing japa softly within one's mouth. And better than that is doing the japa by mind, manasika japa. And then he says, so each of these in turn is more beneficial than the previous one. What he means by beneficial here is the same thing, that it's more efficacious in purifying the mind. So rather than just singing hymns or songs in praise of God, doing japa aloud is more effective. Rather than doing japa aloud, doing japa softly within one's mouth. And rather than doing japa softly within one's mouth, doing the japa mentally. And then he ends by saying, this is called dhyana. That is, if we do mental japa, it's no longer an action of speech, it becomes an action of the mind, so it's dhyana. It's not, though he said this is called dhyana, he doesn't mean this is the only dhyana. In this context, dhyana means, and in the next verse, he goes on to talk about dhyana, and there dhyana means meditation either on a name of God, like doing japa, mentally repeating a name of God, or meditating on a form of God. So in the 7th verse, he talks about dhyana. Why it means only this and not other things, because he said in the 3rd verse, doing action for the love of God. So if we say meditating on, like people meditate on chakras and all these things, and different people meditate on all sorts of things, unless you consider what you're meditating on to be a name or form of God, you're not doing it for the love of God, you're doing it for some other reason. So Bhagavan's particularly talking here, this is Bhakti Marga, Bhakti and Karma Marga. Bhagavan doesn't take them as two separate paths, he takes the preliminary stages of Bhakti Marga is what is called Nishkarmiya Karma. That is with doing actions just for the love of God, not for to gain any thing thereby. So in the 7th verse about meditation, what he says is, rather than meditating interruptedly, meditating uninterruptedly, like the flow of a river or the falling of ghee, is superior to meditate. What he means by this is, why he says this is, if we are trying to meditate, say we're trying to meditate on a form of God or a name of God, if our meditation is constantly interrupted by other thoughts, that indicates that we have more concern about other things than we have about God. If we really love God, it'll be easy to fix our mind on God, and our mind won't easily slip away to other things because we are meditating on what we love. But so the extent to which our meditation on God is uninterrupted is a measure of the love with which we're doing it. And as I said earlier on, what purifies the mind is not the action itself, but the love with which it's done. That's why Bhagavan says uninterrupted meditation is superior to uninterrupted meditation. Superior here means it's more effective means of purifying the mind. So up to verse 7, he's talking about different actions that we can do by body, speech, and mind to purify the mind. But as I say, what purifies the mind is the love with which we do them. But then in verse 8, he goes on to say what is the best of all means of purifying the mind. What he says in verse 8 is, rather than Āṇma-Viddai, Ananya-Bhava, in which he is I, is the best among all. What these terms means is, Anya means what is other, implying what is other than oneself. So Āṇma-Viddai means meditating on something other than oneself. In this context, it means meditating on God as if he were other than oneself. So if we think God, if we are doing any puja, japa, or dhyana, that dhyana in the sense of meditating on a name or form of God, we are meditating on something other than ourselves, because we still take God to be something other than ourselves. But what he says, rather than such āṇma-vichara, ananya-vichara is best of all. Ananya-vichara, ananya means what is not other. It's the opposite of anya. So Ananya-vichara means meditating on what is not other. What is not other than ourself? Only ourself is not other than ourself. So Ananya-vichara implies meditating on oneself. In other words, meditating on nothing other than oneself. That means meditating on oneself. In other words, it's another term referring to the practice of Atma-vichara. And he clarifies what he means by ananya-vichara by saying there's a relative clause, avanaham ahum. That means in which he is I. He here refers to God. So when we understand that God is not something other than ourselves, God is what is always shining in our heart as I. When we recognize, when we are firmly convinced of that and recognize of that, what is the best way to meditate on God? Only to meditate on I, to meditate on ourselves. And so what he says here, that is the best among all. What he means by best among all, firstly, all here can mean among all practices of all forms of meditation. It can mean among all bhakti practices. And in fact, it can mean among all spiritual practices. The best of all is to meditate on oneself. In other words, to practice self-attentiveness or Āṭma-vichara. Why is it the best among all? Because supposing we are meditating on a name or form of God, when our mind wanders away, we try to bring it back to the name and form of God. So what draws our mind away from the thought of God towards other things is our vasanas. Vasanas means our inclinations. So we have an inclination, whatever things interest us or concern us, it's the vasanas that our interest or concern in anything else is a manifestation of our vasana to attend to or to experience such things. So long as our vasanas are strong, when we are trying to meditate on the name of form or form of God, our mind will keep on wandering away towards other things because of the strength of our vasanas. So by cultivating more and more love for God, we slowly wean our mind off thinking of other things. So instead of thinking of anything else, we're thinking only of God. But that is good. But why it is less effective than Ananya-vichara? Because we still have an inclination to attend to something other than ourselves. That is, the name or form of God is still something other than ourselves. So it's still something external. It's still a vishaya. So what we are basically doing is we are removing many Vishaya Vasanas by strengthening this Vishaya Vasana to attend to whatever name or form of God we love. So this is a rather indirect way, because eventually we have to leave even that name and form of God in order to know what we actually are. Whereas with self-investigation, we are attending directly to ourselves. So we are not replacing other Vishaya Vasanas with the Vasana to attend to God. We are every time we try to turn our attention back towards ourselves, that is, at each moment in our life, we have a choice. Either we attend to something other than ourselves, or we attend to ourselves. The more we choose to attend to ourselves, the more we weaken the vasana, the inclination to attend to anything else. So the direct way to purify the mind, and purify the mind thoroughly of all Vishaya Vasanas, is to turn our attention back towards ourselves. So self-investigation as Bhagavan says here, it is best among all. That means in this context, all these verses are talking about purification of mind. So the best among all means to purify the mind is Atma-vichara. That is what is implied by this 8th verse. So if we are drawn to this path at all, then this is the best path to follow, because once we've understood that what we are seeking to know is only ourselves, and only when we know ourselves as we actually are, will we thereby eradicate ego. Once we've understood that, why should we seek any other means to purify the mind? Why not take to the direct means? And self-investigation is not only the direct means to purify the mind, it's also the direct means to know what we actually are. Because so long as we're practicing Atma-vichara, we are gradually weakening our Vishaya vasanas. The Vishaya vasanas are the inclinations that draw our attention away from ourselves. So we're slowly weakening these by attending to ourselves. But so long as we rise as ego, we cannot be completely free of Vishaya vasanas. Because as Bhagavan says in verse 25 of Uninterrupted, the ego is a formless phantom. As a formless phantom, it has no existence of its own, but it seems to come into existence by grasping form. That is, it's not that obviously it has to come into existence in order to grasp form. So it's not because of grasping form that it comes into existence, but that is its very nature. As soon as it comes into existence, it grasps form. It cannot come into existence without grasping form. So he says, grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. That the ego, we cannot stand as ego without grasping form. Forms here mean something other than ourselves, because ego is formless. So any form, any phenomenon is something other than ourselves. And we grasp it by being aware of it. So grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes. So this is the nature of ego. So long as we rise as ego, that grasping tendency, that grasping inclination, that inclination to grasp things other than ourselves will be there. In other words, Vishaya vasanas are the very nature of ego. So we can weaken the Vishaya vasanas to a considerable extent, but we cannot get rid of them entirely without getting rid of ego. Ego is the root of all vasanas. That is, it's only when we rise as ego, but we have inclination to know other things. So Vishaya vasanas are the very nature of ego, and they cannot exist without ego. So in order to eradicate all Vishaya vasanas, we need to eradicate ego. So what is called vasanakshaya, the destruction of all vasanas, is nothing but destruction of ego. Other paths, like meditating on a name or form of God, it can purify the mind up to a certain extent, but it cannot eradicate ego. Why? Because ego is a false knowledge of ourself, an awareness of ourself as something other than what we actually are. So as long as we so long as we rise as ego, we're not aware of ourselves as we actually are. So the only way to eradicate ego, because it's a false awareness of ourselves, is to know ourselves as we actually are. That is, correct knowledge of ourselves alone will destroy the false knowledge of ourselves. The false knowledge, ego is what I mean by the false knowledge of ourselves. Ego is an erroneous awareness of ourselves, an awareness of ourselves as something other than what we actually are. Because as ego, we're always aware of ourselves as I am this body. Not necessarily this current body, but some body or other. Whatever body is then, we then experience as I. That's the body we've grasped and we take to be I. So we cannot get rid of ego by any means other than self-investigation. So self-investigation is both the most effective means to purify the mind, in that it's most direct and the fastest means to purify the mind. And it's the only means by which we can purify the mind completely. Because what are the impurities in the mind? Nothing but the Vishaya vasanas. To get rid of the Vishaya vasanas completely, we've got to get rid of ego. So we can get rid of, and we can get rid of ego only by Atma-vichara, self-investigation. So self-investigation is the only means to purify the mind completely, and it's the most effective, the most fastest means to purify the mind. So if we've been drawn to this path, we should stick to this path. It doesn't matter, it doesn't mean that occasionally, if we feel inclined to sometimes just look at a picture of Bhagavan or inwardly sing his name or something or whatever, if that appeals to us, no wrong in doing that, but that cannot be a substitute for Āṇma-Vichara, because though we've got the picture of Bhagavan, and though we all naturally have love for Bhagavan because he's given us these teachings and everything about his life and his teachings attracts us, but he himself has said, I am not this form. I am that which is shining in each and every one of you as I. So the true form of Bhagavan is not the picture of him, or even the name Ramana. That is not his true name or form. As he said, the first and foremost name of God, his first and foremost name, Bhagavan's first and foremost name is I am, because he is that which is always shining in our heart as I. So the best way to meditate upon him is to meditate only on I. And that's the most effective means to purify the mind. In this question, this question I asked in particular reference to trauma, that childhood trauma or any other. Many people have had very bad experiences in their life of one form or another, and often these particularly bad experiences as a child, experience of abandonment or abuse or whatever, that it can be difficult to shed that pain. But if we think about it, any trauma in the past, whether in childhood or in adulthood, is now, it's just a memory. Why does that memory persist? The memory can trouble us only when we think about it, only when we allow our mind to dwell on those past traumas can they trouble us. If memory of past trauma is often coming to our mind, that shows that we have a vasana, an inclination to think of such things. So since self-investigation is weakening all Vishaya vasanas, the most effective way to free ourselves from those bad memories that keep on coming back to our mind, the most effective way to free ourselves is to turn our attention back towards ourselves. Whenever our mind is troubled by memories of past bad experiences, the most effective means to free ourselves from the hold that those memories have over us. Why? The memories don't actually have a hold over us. It's we who are holding on to those memories because of our vasana, because of our inclination to think of those things. Those memories are very painful. Why should we continue thinking of those painful memories? When, according to Bhagavan, our real nature is infinite happiness. So rather than thinking of painful memories of the past, why should we not think of attend only to ourselves? Because we are ever present, in past, present, and future. What exists permanently in all times and beyond time is only I am. So let us cling to that which is eternal, that which is beyond all pleasurable and painful experiences. That alone will save us. That is all, ultimately, all these experiences and all these memories of the experiences, they're all unreal. They're all a bad dream, that's all. So why should we continue clinging to the unreal? So long as we continue clinging to the unreal, we are wallowing in it and we're not going to escape from it. If we want to escape from the unreal, And all suffering is also unreal. So if you want to be free of, if we free ourselves from everything that is unreal, we thereby free ourselves from suffering, because suffering is a part of both pleasure and pain are all part of the unreal appearance. So if we want to free ourselves from these things, the direct means is self-investigation. So we need not feel, if we've been attracted at all to self-investigation, we need not feel, I have to do other practices in order to purify my mind before I can do Atma-vichara effectively. Okay, now because of our strong Vishaya vasanas, we may not be able to do Atma-vichara so effectively, in the sense that often our mind will be going out towards other things. But little by little, if we try a small amount of effort put into attending to ourselves, is worth many times that amount of effort made attending to things other than ourselves. So this is the most efficacious path. So we need to have a strong conviction that this is not only the only means to liberation, but it's the only means, it's by far and away the most effective means to purify our mind. So rather than wasting our interest and effort in other practices, we should try as much as possible to practice Atma-vichara. As I say, that doesn't mean, if sometimes out of love for Bhagavan, out of desperation, sometimes we pray to him, or we just sing his name, or we look at his picture or something. If we're doing that with love, that's very good. But that when we think of his name or see his form, when we look into his eyes in the picture, what they should remind us of? But he is that which is ever shining in us as I. So we should, his picture, if we've really understood Bhagavan, when we look at it, the eyes in his picture, see his eyes looking at us, they will turn our attention back towards us, because the whole purpose of Bhagavan's manifestation, why Bhagavan came in human form, it was for one purpose and one purpose alone, to turn our attention back towards ourselves. So this is the essence of, what Bhagavan's teaching is, what Bhagavan's life and teaching is all about, is turning our attention back towards ourselves. So we need not, if we are following this path of Atma-vichara, even if not very effectively, even if we're like a small child first learning to walk, often falling down and everything, doesn't matter. At least continue trying. That's the best thing we can. The most effective means to purify the mind is to try as much as we can to be self-attentive.
Yes, yeah, that's very helpful what you say, and I think the question comes because you said it's the most efficacious means
Yes.
to liberation. For some reason, for some people or many people, it seems also like the most difficult means. Or heard, for example, in some video that David Goldman put on in YouTube, for example, that some people report that it's very hard. It's very to constantly have your attention on yourself, and maybe doing puja, japa, or dhyana is focusing your attention somewhere else, not something other than yourself. Is to begin with, maybe it's easier for people, but what I feel that some people feel in this path is that there's like a feeling that is constantly nagging at them, like saying, I feel I'm not good enough, or not pure enough, or I'm not fit for this path. I still want to think that I can follow through on this path without resorting to any practice or whatever. But I feel that some people feel that they are skipping like a step, or some purification to undergo some purification before, or they think because this is for advanced seekers or things like that.
Yeah.
But you say no, this is for anybody who is attracted at all.
Yes.
To this path.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. That is, Bhagavan has said this path is the easiest of all. He said very explicitly in, I think in verse 3, if I remember correctly, of Āṇma-Viddai, more than any other path, this path is the easiest. So he says very explicitly. So when he says it's the easiest and we find it difficult, we have to think why we find it difficult. We find it difficult because of the strength of our Vishaya Vasanas, because we have so much liking, so much interest, so much inclination to dwell on other things, to hold on to other things, but to turn our attention back towards ourselves, which requires letting go of other things, seems difficult. Doesn't matter. However difficult it seems to be, we're all able, at least little by little, even if only for a few seconds at a time, we're able to attend to ourselves. Let us take advantage, let's constantly be trying to attend to ourselves, even if it's just 1 or 2 seconds here, 1 or 2 seconds there, doesn't matter. Every moment that we attend to ourselves, we are taking large strides towards our goal. So as I said, even a little effort put into this path is far more efficacious than a lot of effort put into any other path, because this is the direct path. This alone is the direct path. It's leading us straight to our goal. So it doesn't mean that we necessarily have to give up all other practices, but we shouldn't attach much importance to other practices. The most important practice, the most efficacious practice, Anaitena Uttamam, the best among all, as he says in verse 8 of Upadeshundya, is this path of self-investigation. So let's trust what Bhagavan has taught us about this path. Let us try our best, even if we're not very good at it doesn't matter. The very fact that we're trying will be purifying our mind. Because why are we trying? We're trying because we have love to follow the path that Bhagavan has taught us. So whether we succeed in this path or not doesn't matter. Success is in Bhagavan. Our success or failure, that's all in Bhagavan's hands. Let us try. He will do the rest. If we sincerely try, he will take care of everything else. So we need to have trust in him. And if we don't trust Bhagavan, what else can we trust? What is more trustworthy than Bhagavan?
Yeah, and also I think that adding it's another difficult that it's added is that in those moments when you want to you have suffering or those traumas come to your mind or something, it's when you would like to be doing self-inquiry but you can't, for example, and that's I think very troubling for some people because I cannot do it when it has to be done, for example.
Even when troubling memories come to our mind, who is aware of those troubling memories? I am. So there is never a moment when that fundamental self-awareness, I am, when that is ever present, that is the background, that is the screen on which all these troubling memories are appearing. So let's not attend to the pictures on the screen, let's attend to the screen, attend to the background. It may seem difficult at times when our mind is much pained by past memories, but the very pain of those memories should motivate us to try harder to cling to I.
So basically, it's like rectifying our attention. It's like if though a trauma comes, for example, in our mind while we're meditating or doing self-inquiry, it's to put the effort to rectify the attention and try to not feed that attention going outwards.
That word you use, rectify, is a very appropriate word in this context. Bhagavan has used an equivalent word in the 3rd verse of Upadeshundya, where he talks about nishkarmiya karma done for God. He says karate tirati. Tirati means rectifying or reforming or setting it right, correcting the karate. Karate there in that context means mind, or actually more than mind, it's the will that we are purifying. In Sanskrit, the term is chitta suddhi, purification of mind. In the Sanskrit version of Upadeshundya, Bhagavan says chitta sodakam, purifying the chittam. Chittam means the will. The will means the collection of all our vasanas together. The vasanas are what constitutes the will. So the will is the totality of all vasanas. So it's the will is what needs to be rectified. So all spiritual practice, whatever it may be, ultimately it comes down to rectifying our will. Now our will is full of Vishaya Vasana, the inclination to attend to everything. We have to weaken those Vishaya Vasanas and strengthen our Sat Vasana. Sat Vasana means the inclination just to be as we actually are. So that is what all spiritual practice is about. And the most effective means of purifying our mind or rectifying our will is this practice of self-investigation.
Yeah, that's very good. And it's good to have in mind that each time that we're turning our attention within, we are rectifying the awareness, the false awareness for the correct awareness.
What is the error that needs correcting? Our inclination to attend to anything else. So every time we turn our attention back towards us, we are taking one step. I mean, we are little by little chipping away at that wrong inclination and replacing it with the right inclination just to be as we actually are, the Sat Vasana. That's what the whole of it, that's what it's all about.